Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I grew up in a family that knew how to stretch every dollar until it screamed. My dad worked the graveyard shift at a creamery, spending his nights around vats of milk and cream, coming home smelling like sour dairy. He never learned to read or write, but he could work harder than anyone I ever knew. My mom stayed home but threw herself into every PTA meeting and community event she could find. Between dad's paycheck covering rent and basic groceries, there wasn't much left over. That's why I picked up a paper route as soon as I was old enough to throw a newspaper without hitting someone's window. Every month, that money went straight into our family budget, helping us afford little extras here and there. One of those extras was our monthly tradition of going to Pizza Hut on a Sunday afternoon. We'd get salad from the bar and split a pizza between the three of us. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. This one Sunday in late 87 or early 88, I was about 14 years old. We walked into our regular Pizza Hut around 2 in the afternoon, the sun still bright outside. We slid into our usual booth, the red vinyl seats squeaking under us. Then we waited for our server, and waited some more. My parents talked about their week. I cracked a few jokes about my math teacher. We heard the phone ring a couple times from somewhere in the back, but that was it. No footsteps, no clattering dishes, no voices calling out orders. After 10 or 15 minutes, something felt wrong. I slid out of the booth and walked up to the counter. I called out to see if anyone was there but got no response. I tried again, asking if anybody was in the back. Still nothing. I leaned over the counter and peered into the kitchen area. Not a single person. My stomach did this weird flip like when you're watching a horror movie and you know something bad is about to happen. I walked back to my parents and told them there was nobody back there. Dad suggested checking the bathrooms. Mom nodded and headed to the women's room while Dad checked the men's. They both came back shaking their heads. The whole restaurant was empty except for us. Mom asked if we should call the police, pointing at the phone on the wall. Right then it rang, and all three of us jumped. I suggested checking the freezer, saying that's where they always find the bodies in movies and that I'd check it. Mom immediately said no way, and that my father would check it instead. Dad pointed at me and said I ran faster. While they argued about who should go look, I slipped behind the counter. I grabbed this big pizza cutter from the prep area. The blade was sharp enough to make me feel slightly better about what I might find. I checked the back door first. Locked from the inside. Then I looked in the tiny manager's office. Empty. Finally, I stood in front of the walk-in freezer. My parents had stopped arguing and now stood behind me, all of us staring at that silver door. I grabbed the handle, took a breath, and yanked it open. Boxes of cheese, bags of pepperoni, containers of sauce, but no bodies. I was weirdly disappointed. Someone called out hello from the front area. We practically jumped out of our skin. We rushed back to the entrance and found a middle-aged man standing next to his wife by the "Please wait to be seated" sign. The man said they'd like a table for two. Mom apologized and explained we didn't work there. The man said okay, but repeated that they wanted a table for two. Mom told him there was nobody here and that we'd checked everywhere. The man acknowledged the place looked empty and asked if they could have a table in the back. Mom explained again that we didn't work there and that nobody who was supposed to be here was actually here. The man asked where they could sit. Dad told them to just find a place to park their butts since the place was empty anyway. He told Mom to call the police and let them know what we'd found. With that, my dad shuffled off to the salad bar. My father never let an opportunity for free food go to waste. Mom called the police and told them the situation. They said someone would come check it out, but apparently they didn't think it was urgent because it took over an hour for an officer to show up. In the meantime, that couple sat down at the table. The man called out asking for menus. My dad, with his weird sense of humor, grabbed 2 menus from the stand and handed them over. I was already at the drink fountain filling cups because why not? Mom found the coffee supplies and started a pot. The man ordered 1 sweet tea and 1 unsweet with lemon. I brought them their drinks. The man then ordered 2 dinner salads and a large pepperoni pizza. Dad pointed to the salad bar and told them it might be a few minutes on the pizza since we had to wait for an actual employee to show up, but they should go ahead and hit the salad bar. Then a church nearby must have let out because suddenly people started flooding in. One woman said hello and mentioned there were 4 of them. Another guy said they had 2 more coming. A man who'd apparently been trying to call asked if he could get 2 large pizzas to go. By now, my mom and I were basically running the place. A young guy who came in with his family mentioned he used to work at the other Pizza Hut in town during college, so he jumped behind the counter and started making pizzas. Mom took orders and calculated bills in her head like some kind of human calculator. I delivered drinks and food. My dad? He was eating salad and chatting with customers like he owned the place. People kept asking how to pay. Mom figured out the totals, including tax, faster than most people could use a calculator, then had them write checks. We slid the checks under the register without touching the actual cash inside. When the police officer finally arrived, we were relieved to see it was someone my dad knew. Officer Shield, I'll call him. He used to stop by the creamery on night shift for free ice cream and would chat with my dad. Officer Shield asked what was going on. Dad explained everything. I may have mentioned being disappointed we didn't find any dead bodies in the freezer. Officer Shield checked the register first. Cash was still in there. He walked around inside and outside the building. No signs of a break-in or struggle. He called it in and waited for instructions. While he waited, he grabbed himself a slice of pizza. 20 or 30 minutes later, he got orders to lock up the building. But there was a problem. He couldn't find any keys. The front doors locked from the outside with a key, or you could lock them from the inside and go out the back door, which also needed a key to lock. He called that information back in. A few minutes later, the lead officer on shift arrived. He looked around at the restaurant half full of happy customers eating pizza, then looked at Officer Shield with confusion. The lead officer asked why the report said there were no employees when people were clearly being served. I was walking by with a pizza to go when I happily explained that we didn't work there and were just being helpful. Eventually, after a couple more hours, the police managed to contact the owner. The owner contacted the manager, and she came storming in like a tornado. She was red-faced and yelling, clearly panicked. She tried to accuse my parents and me of stealing from the company, but Officer Shield shut that down fast. He pointed out the checks under the register, the order slips we'd been keeping, and the list of supplies we'd used. Then he mentioned we could have just left and let thieves clean the place out. She backed down and started making calls to figure out where her employees were. Turns out the assistant manager had found out that morning her boyfriend was cheating on her. She'd come to work angry and took it out on the male employees, screaming at them and calling them names. They'd all walked out. Then she decided to quit too and just left the doors unlocked, with nobody inside. Officer Shield turned to us and told us that if we ever found ourselves in a situation like this again, it would be far more helpful if we refrained from being helpful. We nodded. We did pay for our food and drinks, of course, but yeah, we got banned for life from that Pizza Hut anyway. My dad worked construction for 20 years before he retired, and my mom was a teacher at the elementary school 2 towns over. We lived in a modest ranch house with a big front yard that my dad took pride in maintaining. He was the type who mowed in straight lines and edged the sidewalk every weekend without fail. The house next to ours had been empty for about 6 months when the new neighbors moved in. At first, we thought things would be fine. My dad even went over with a casserole my mom made to welcome them, but the guy who answered the door just took it without saying thanks and shut the door in his face. That should have been our first warning sign. It started small. They would blast music late at night on weeknights when I had school the next day. My dad would go over and ask them to turn it down, and they would for maybe an hour before cranking it back up. Then they started throwing their trash over the fence into our yard. Beer cans, food wrappers, cigarette butts. My dad would collect it all in a garbage bag and take it back over to them, explaining that their trash kept ending up on our property. The husband would just shrug and say he had no idea how it got there. Things got worse when they got a big car, one of those oversized ones that barely fit in their driveway. Our 2 properties were separated by a strip of grass that belonged to us. My dad had put up these wooden poles along the edge to mark the property line. They were about 4 feet tall and painted white, so they were easy to see. There was a good way for them to get into their driveway from the street, but for some reason, they decided it was easier to just cut through our grass. The first time it happened, my dad thought maybe they made a mistake. He went over and knocked on their door. He told the neighbor about the tire tracks through our grass that morning and said he thought they might have driven through there by accident instead of using the street entrance to their driveway. The neighbor asked what the big deal was. My dad explained that those wooden poles marked our property line and that he needed them to use the street to get to their driveway. The neighbor called the poles stupid sticks and said they were in the way and that it was not his problem. My dad tried to explain that it was his problem because that was our property he was driving on and he was damaging our grass and knocking over the poles. The neighbor told my dad to sue him then and slammed the door in his face. My dad just stood there for a minute before walking back. I could tell he was angry, but he was trying to stay calm. My mom suggested we call the police, but my dad said it probably was not worth it yet. He went out and fixed the poles, packing dirt around them and making sure they were sturdy. 2 days later, they did it again. Drove right through, knocked over 3 poles, left deep ruts in the grass. My dad fixed them again. Then it happened again the next week, and again after that. Every time my dad would go over there, and every time the neighbor would tell him the same thing to sue him. It became like a game to them. The wife would laugh from the window when they did it. Sometimes they would do it, even when using the street entrance would have been faster. They were just doing it to mess with us at that point. My dad kept fixing the poles, but I could see it was eating at him. This went on for about 2 months. Then one day we saw them packing up their car with suitcases. My mom ran into the wife at the grocery store and she mentioned they were going on vacation for 10 days to visit family out of state. My dad did not say anything when he heard this, but I saw him smile a little. The next morning I woke up to the sound of digging. My dad was out in the yard at 7 in the morning with a shovel, pulling up every single one of those wooden poles. He dug the holes way bigger than they needed to be, making them almost 2 feet deep and wide. Then he drove to the hardware store and came back with his truck bed full of concrete bags. Big ones, the kind that weigh 80 pounds each. My dad told me to come help him mix the concrete. I spent the whole day helping him. We mixed bag after bag of concrete and poured it into those holes until they were filled almost to the top. He let it set for a day, then put in new poles. These ones were longer and thicker than the old ones, made of stronger wood. He sunk them deep into the concrete and let everything cure for a few more days. Then he carefully replaced all the grass on top, so you could not even tell anything had changed, unless you tried to move one of those poles. When the neighbors got back from vacation, everything looked exactly the same when they left. My dad acted normal, waved at them when he saw them, went about his business. 3 days went by without incident. Then on the 4th day, we were eating dinner when we heard this massive bang from outside. It sounded like a car crash. We all ran to the window and saw their car sitting in our grass with the back end completely smashed up. The bumper was hanging off, the tailgate was dented in, and one of the tail lights was shattered. The pole they hit was still standing straight, did not even have a scratch on it. The husband came storming out of the car, red in the face, screaming. He ran right up to our door and started pounding on it. My dad opened it. The neighbor demanded to know what my dad had done and yelled about his car being ruined. He said my dad sabotaged the poles and that he had to pay for the damage. My dad told him that he had no idea what he was talking about and that those were the same poles that had always been there. The neighbor called him a liar and said they never did that before and that it was going to cost thousands to fix. My dad reminded him that he had warned him multiple times to stop driving through our property and that he should have listened. The neighbor screamed that my dad did it on purpose and that it was illegal and that he was calling the cops. My dad told him to go ahead and explained that he was the one who drove through clearly marked private property and damaged his own vehicle. Then my dad said that if the neighbor really thought he had a case, he could sue him. My dad smiled at him the exact same way the neighbor had smiled at us all those times, then walked back inside and closed the door. The neighbor stood there for a minute before stomping back to look at his ruined car. He did call the police, but when they showed up and heard the whole story, they told him there was nothing they could do. My dad had every right to put posts on his own property, and the neighbor was the one who chose to drive through them. The officer even suggested the neighbor was lucky my dad did not press charges for property damage and trespassing. I needed a place to stay for spring and summer semester, and money was tight. Dorms cost too much, and most apartments wanted year-long leases I couldn't afford. That's when I found a sublease posted online. The guy seemed normal enough. We had a mutual friend from one of my classes, so I figured he was trustworthy. The apartment was actually really nice. Way nicer than anything else I could afford on my part-time retail salary. It was one of those 4-bedroom, 4-bathroom setups where everyone gets their own space. He told me the other 3 roommates were chill and mostly kept to themselves. There was one catch. He wanted to do the whole thing under the table. No involving the leasing office, no official paperwork, just me paying him directly each month. I'd done something similar at my last place, so I didn't think much of it. We shook hands, I moved my stuff in, and everything seemed fine. I should mention that I have a dog. She's a 2-year-old hound mix I adopted from the shelter my freshman year. She's sweet, house-trained, and generally well-behaved. Her only issue is thunderstorms. When the weather gets bad, she loses it completely. About 2 months into living there, we got hit with this massive storm. The kind where the sky turns green and the tornado sirens go off. I was stuck at work watching the rain come down in sheets, and all I could think about was my poor dog alone in my room. When I finally got home that night, I opened my bedroom door, and my heart just sank. She'd completely torn up the carpet along the edges trying to dig her way out. There were strips of it pulled up near the door and the closet. I felt terrible. She was still shaking in the corner when I found her. I found my roommate the next day and came clean about everything. I showed him the damage and told him I'd cover all the costs to fix it. My dad knows a guy who does carpet work, so I had him come out and give me an estimate. He looked it over and said it would run between $200 and $400 to replace the carpet in my room. Not cheap, but manageable. My roommate seemed okay with the plan. He just told me to make sure it was taken care of before I moved out. July came around and I packed up all my stuff. My lease was technically up and I was moving back home for a few weeks before fall semester started. I said goodbye to the roommates and figured I'd hear from him soon about settling up for the carpet. 1 month went by, nothing. I was on vacation with my family at the beach when everything went sideways. My mom came up to me looking confused and annoyed. She said some guy had called her 3 times that morning. Then his mother called. I had no idea how they even got my parents' phone numbers. I certainly never gave them out. My dad got on the phone with them, and that's when they hit him with their claim. They told him the apartment complex was charging them $4,000 to replace the carpet in my room. $4,000 for a 10 by 10 room. They gave me until the end of September to pay them or they'd take me to court. My dad has worked in construction his whole life. He knows what things cost. He called them out on their numbers right away. There was no way a single room of carpet cost that much. He got on the phone with the leasing office and somehow convinced them to send him a breakdown of the charges. When that document came through, his face went red. The carpet in my room was listed at $273. That was it. Everything else on that bill was damage from other parts of the apartment. Damage I had nothing to do with. We called my former roommate back. My dad kept his cool and asked him to explain the other charges on the bill. That's when my former roommate made his ridiculous claim. He said that all 3 of his other roommates would testify that my dog caused all the damage in the entire apartment. I actually laughed when I heard that. My dog, who never left my bedroom when I wasn't home, somehow caused a bottle of wine to explode on the kitchen ceiling. My dog destroyed the dishwasher. My dog ruined one of the guys' bathtubs. It was absurd. My mom called her lawyer. We all sat down together and went through everything. The lawyer asked to see my lease. I told him there wasn't one. I never signed anything with the complex. I only had text messages and a handshake agreement with my roommate. The lawyer smiled at that and he explained that since I was never an official tenant, I wasn't legally liable for any damages to the apartment. The apartment complex couldn't come after me since they didn't even know I existed. But I'm not a terrible person, so I told my parents I was still willing to pay the $273 for my room. It was the right thing to do. We reached out to my former roommate and his mother with our offer. I'd pay for what my dog actually damaged, and we'd call it even. They shot us down completely. His mother got on the phone and started screaming about how I needed to pay for everything. She went on about how her son was a good boy, and I was trying to scam them. She called me a freeloader. That's when I decided I was done being nice. I gathered up every single text message, every Venmo payment, every piece of evidence I had that showed I'd been living there. I put it all in a folder and walked right into the leasing office. I handed it to the manager and explained the whole situation from start to finish. She got very quiet as she read through everything. Then she picked up her phone. Having an unofficial tenant is a huge violation of the lease. My former roommate and his buddies were on the hook for the full $4,000 in damages. But that wasn't all. The complex was also suing them for breach of contract since they'd let me live there without permission. I heard they tried to fight it, but they didn't have a leg to stand on. They'd broken their lease, they'd tried to scam me, and now they were paying for it. All of this could have been avoided if they'd just taken the $273. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.